I am the owner and founder of Fly2Wellness, which is a holistic health practice that's really focused entirely on root cause analysis. So I am a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, which is a giant mouthful, but really it all boils down to health coach. And what makes me different from your average health coach is that I offer a few things that health coaches don't usually offer, which is diagnostic testing. I firmly believe that the only way to really understand what's going on inside someone's body is to really take a look at what's going on inside someone's body. So I use the testing for that. And mostly I take the client experience, my education and experience, and those tests, and I bring them together to understand what's causing the malfunctions in their body, and then we heal it holistically. That's essentially what I do. The people who have already gone to 5 or 6 practitioners, they're, seeking and searching, and predominantly they've lost hope in the ability to heal, hope in the ability to move forward. And I love that universe of clients because I was that person. And it really is the perfect synergy of my own personal experience coming together with the real offer of hope to other people. And I know that that's what's missing most across all forms of wellness. It doesn't have to be conventional medicine, which I think most of us agree is hopeless. But outside of that, we need to bring hope back as usually step one. My clients, almost all of them, have digestive issues and a wide range of bodily dysfunctions. But by and large, they're all missing the one thing, and that is hope that they can be well and live the life that they're looking for. And we start with that. I really reject the whole concept of this is your deck of cards and this is what you have to deal with for a lot of reasons. One of them is my own personal story, and we can touch on some of those pieces as we go. But by and large, anything is possible with the human body, and we're not really educated that way. Even in basic elementary school, high school, college, doesn't matter where you go, we're not taught that the body is resilient. And for that reason, it's very easy to buy the lie. So you get into any practitioner's office and they're like, well, we've hit this roadblock, or this is what's happening, and this is your new normal, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I reject that. I reject it all day long. And so that's usually the first place to begin, sort of unpacking, why is that a part of your belief right now? And how can I show you with real physiological stuff, which is where the testing comes in? How can we see in black and white that it's possible to change, it's possible to do better, and it's possible to be the person you want to be? The name of my company is Fly2Wellness on purpose because I believe we have this very short life. And the goal is to live it, not be stuck inside or twisting your fingers or tied to medications all day long. And surely there's a place for medication sometimes, but I think we need to open the possibilities first and see and use medications usually as a last resort. Every medication has a long-term side effect. What's interesting about side effects is it's just a name to describe things that are happening with medications that we either didn't expect or don't want. So the effects of medications are the ones we want to see. The side effects are those that we're not 100% pleased with, or they weren't the intended reason for taking it. So if we can get that straight at the beginning, it usually helps the conversation move forward. And when it comes to psychological medications, which of course I don't dispense, I have no governance at all over medication, there's a lot that happens behind the scenes that medical doctors won't acknowledge and patients constantly complain about. And when people have come to me many times over with this laundry list of side effects, the first thing I start looking at is, well, how is your body supposed to work? Let's pretend that the medication's not there. What's not working? And how can we start rehabilitating your body to create a system that works? And then we'll talk about what's going on with the actual prescription that's sitting on the side. It's not an all or nothing game. It really isn't. And sometimes people get so frightened about doing anything natural, including food. What foods are healthy for you? How about including healthy fats in your diet so that you can create your own hormones and neurotransmitters and keep your gut healthy? There's so many things that most people, once they dive into that world of medications, they're basically told, don't worry about your diet, so they generally aren't eating well. And it starts to snowball really, really quickly. So in answer to your original question, it really all comes down to side effects are really your body's way of showing you that something isn't quite right over and over and over again. And it doesn't have to be something's not quite right with this medication. It's probably your body still saying the original problem that this medication is trying to solve is still here, and you haven't addressed that. And I'm going to give you every signal I can because I care. And that's usually where we begin. So diet is incredibly important. I firmly believe that most of the reason why people end up in that spectrum of do I need medication or I need to go see some kind of a doctor or I can't get rid of this anxiety is because their nutrition is already poor. They're probably missing nutrients to begin with. And it all makes sense if you think about how the body actually functions. We can't create neurotransmitters, which is our brain chemistry, if we don't have a full complement of nutrients in the body. So we need our own fuel to produce all of the things that make our bodies work. And it's really as simple as that. If for some reason we've already taken that step into medication, medication is famous for stealing almost all of your nutrients. So your B vitamins are the first to go. B12 is at the very top of that list. B3, B1, B6. It just becomes this never-ending hamster wheel where you're stuck in that loop of I don't have enough fuel, I don't have enough energy, I don't have enough metabolic tools to build the right subset of nutrients and keep my body working. And so you just continue to get sicker and sicker and sicker. And then to make matters worse, a lot of medications, almost all medications, they toy either with your cravings or your hunger response. Most people that are on long-term medications, especially for depression and anxiety, oftentimes when I see them, if they come to me, they have no hunger response at all. Which means you're working with somebody who doesn't have the ability to refuel. There's limited availability of nutrients in every direction. And worse, oftentimes, especially in the standard American diet, which is probably the worst one there is, you end up going for what's considered a comfort food, which is usually nutrient deficient on top of it. So you just keep feeding that cycle of I don't have any nutrients. Well, nutrients are our fuel. They're human fuel. And it's the only thing that we could possibly need, want, or use to correct a bodily imbalance. So, the long story short is that we need to have a full complement of nutrients in order to just be alive. And when we start stripping all that away, and then the medicine comes in and takes it even further out and prevents you from absorbing or using, you can't really get out. And this is why I think most people feel so stuck. They get stuck in this wheel of, I never feel well. And if I, use my abilities 5 minutes a day to say, oh, I really don't want to do this and I'm going to just lower my dose, then you feel worse. And it's a self-perpetuating cycle. And it usually begins with nutrient deficiency, which means you're probably not eating a good diet to begin with. Ironically, there's a resource that everyone should have in their bookshelf at home, and the book is called Drug Muggers by Susie Cohen. It is the absolute best. It's been around forever, and it details really by medication what it's taking from your body. So you don't have to guess. Realistically, we can all assume that every medication out there is stealing your general nutrient minerals. So that's your calcium, magnesium, potassium, phosphorus, all the important minerals that we think we know, like zinc. But in terms of vitamins, the B vitamins are the first to get absorbed and eliminated from the body. B12 is at the top of that list. It's really quite scary because there's a lot of evidence around psychosis, and the only thing being changed in a person's physiology when they're diagnosed with hardcore psychosis is B12 injections, and they recover literally within an hour of the injection. So there's a ton of information that I wish we could share in this interview space, but Drug Muggers by far is the book everyone should own, regardless of whether or not you've had a problem for yourself or you know someone. It's just a great resource because it details by every nutrient category which medication steals what, how efficiently it takes it, and then how to replace it. So hopefully that helps, in the lack of time, right? That helps a little bit to give somebody at least one resource on their shelf. Most medications, almost all of them, steal your hunger response. They don't do it in the first dose though, and I think that's what's really sort of slimy about it. You know, you start taking a medication and you feel like yourself and potentially better because your biochemistry is changing pretty rapidly. Our bodies are very interested in reacting to pharmaceutical agents. That's why they were made that way. That's why they potentially work. At the end of the day, they really don't work at all. But usually within the first 4 to 6 weeks of taking almost anything, you start to lose your hunger. And it's very, very subtle. And you don't really feel it happening until it has actually already happened. And gaining the hunger response back is incredibly difficult when you're still on a medication because its purpose is to do a lot to your biochemistry, of course, to your brain chemistry. And part of that depends on a hunger response. If you can imagine, we are geared to want nutrients so that we can function. By taking away that mechanism, you have made it impossible for that person to gain any nutrients back into their diet. So, it just begins this very ugly cycle of malnutrition in a person that's potentially already malnourished. And on the flip side, you've got, the rest of the drug, especially the inactive ingredients of most medications that are literally stripping your body from its nutrients. So you take those two things together and you end up with a person who is very much unable to recover. It's interesting to note that zinc in particular is a hugely powerful mineral. It does a lot of good work. I always get a little nervous talking about zinc because people shouldn't just start taking it for no reason. We also have a hard time eliminating zinc also for the same reason. We use it so efficiently, but our bodies use it in very small doses for a lot of different metabolic functions. So like if you ever were interested to look at the mineral wheel, there's an image of a mineral wheel that kind of shows all the interconnections between our minerals and how they work together and how interesting it is to see all the body functions kind of working for us. But in terms of zinc in particular, and the example we were talking about a minute ago, when you are sufficiently low in zinc and then you're trying to replace it somewhere in there, if you're already struggling with body dysmorphia and you can't imagine that you look the way you think you do and you're very twisted in the way you view yourself, putting zinc back in almost always, like the B12 example I gave you earlier, will sort of wake you back up to the reality of how you actually look. And there's a lot of physiology going on behind the scenes, not just with your neurotransmitters, but also how your proteins are being synthesized. There's just a lot that starts to happen all at once. And zinc is sort of the flint that gets that process going. It's not a magical element that works all by itself, but it's really the good precursor. And how fascinating it is to give an appropriate amount of zinc to someone who's struggling with their body image and watch them in 1 to 2 weeks time all of a sudden see themselves accurately. And it's all with one mineral. And you have to start asking yourself a couple of times over, why aren't we assessing the minerals first? So when we first started talking, I know that I mentioned that with Fly2Wellness in particular, one of the specialties of my practice is diagnostic testing. And I will tell you, right now especially, the first thing I do with almost all of my clients is get down to some hair tissue mineral analysis testing so that I've at least got a baseline of what type of nutrient profile this person really does have. And that starts to answer a ton of questions. And that's one of the things that used to be done in conventional medicine regularly for over 100 years. And it wasn't until the medical community started making a lot more money with bigger, high volume tests that they got rid of some of these easier, low risk, low income tests. And they got relegated to, I guess, people on my side of the fence, that functional space, right? If they would run them now, I don't think we'd have nearly as many issues with pharmaceuticals or the need for them or the potential theoretical need. B vitamins are essential to being alive. If you really want to talk about B vitamins, we should probably start with B12. Almost everybody knows something about B12. And interestingly enough, B12 has a direct clinical relationship with depression and anxiety. Direct. Everyone knows it. Conventional medicine knows it. It's one of the chief reasons why you can go to your doctor's office, even for a random yearly physical, and they will offer you a B12 shot. It's really such a well-known element. Ironically, when people go into any psychiatry or even just your general GP and ask for some sort of advice around generalized anxiety and depression or eating disorders, that the list is very, very long. They never ever ask for any kind of a blood sample. Let's just check your B12, simple things like that. And ironically, low B12 is, there's a few standards that run across most disease patterns. And again, it's a little outside my scope in terms of the conversation, but it's the type of thing I see all the time. And I'm very interested in it. I'm certified in blood chemistry. I look at blood chemistry results constantly. I'm always doing it as a second opinion piece for almost all of my clients and some people who just want a second opinion on blood chem results. However, what's fascinating is certain disease patterns have 100% in certain areas. And with mental health, you have 100% of the people with mental health have low B12. 100%. So if you have 100% of the people who are deficient in B12 at different levels, somebody's severely deficient, some people are possibly a little bit deficient, but they're all deficient. So if you have 100% of the people deficient in B12, why then aren't you analyzing the B12 before you do anything else? Before you talk, before you offer medications, before you talk about diet change, before any of it? That would probably be the easiest thing to do. And then clinically, there's a ton of evidence. You can look on PubMed, you can go anywhere. This is not hidden information. And you can look at the efficacy of B12 injections, especially in the severely depressed. Even the bulimic, you would be surprised the wide spectrum that B12 really hits on. And you start with either shots, like weekly shots, or IV injections, depending on an IV of it, depending on the severity of the deficiency. But generally, you're going to see a rebound, like an emotional, physiological rebound within hours. This isn't days and weeks. And for me, that's the problem. I think that's why I love what I do so much, because I love to get to those types of issues, how simple it is to solve a problem like that. Very, very simple. B12 is something that's incredibly safe. Again, why it's offered so readily, especially if you think about the fact that you can just go get a B12 anytime you like, and they don't test your B12 levels in advance of that. It almost screams out loud how safe it is. So there's that. I don't necessarily think everybody needs to go run out right now and get themselves a B12 injection or anything else, but it wouldn't hurt to have a B12 lozenge. The easiest way to absorb B12 in the human body is a methylated form, so you would want a methylated B12, which is usually seen on the label of any good supplement as methylcobalamin. So you get a good methylated B12 lozenge, you put it under the tongue and you let it naturally absorb. A little bit will help everyone. A lot is needed by certain people, and that's where the testing really does matter. You want to know if you really do need a large bolus of B12. But it's incredibly safe, and everyone benefits. The entire class of B vitamins, everyone benefits from those. Ironically, we can get B vitamins all day long if we ate a ton of green leafy vegetables and we were really proactive about the way that we eat and live. But because I know that that's not really in everybody's first case scenario, they don't want to run to the grocery store right now and figure out how I'm going to eat better, then get a good methylated B, a very, very good methylated B. There's a few great brands out there. You need to be with a practitioner. You need to have a practitioner brand. This is not the type of thing to buy at a big box store because quality matters. And it matters because you want to get the most absorption of anything that you're taking in supplement form. But ultimately, all of the Bs, great place to go, and B12 is by far the star of this show. Fight or flight, which is your natural response, of course, to being in danger or anything else. But everybody knows fight or flight on some level. Fight or flight is a huge, huge part of anxiety, depression, eating disorders, this whole spectrum, drug addiction, all of it. And the reason that I don't think it gets talked about all that frequently is that most people don't feel like they're in fight or flight. And the reason for that is once you have become chronically locked into a state of fight or flight, you don't recognize that you're in that state. It's just who you are, or it's how things work. And nobody around you seems to notice that you're in fight or flight, because that one small moment of time when you were your former self, then you were in fight or flight, you felt very different and people could notice it. That part has long since passed. So a couple of things happen when you're in fight or flight chronically. Your body just stops producing. Your digestive system generally isn't working almost at all, but very much at a low pace. The pace of your entire body, so all your body functions, is going much more slowly. You can almost think about it like a conveyor belt. If it's supposed to be moving at a nice, even pace, when you're in fight or flight, it's going incredibly slow, almost like it's not moving at all. And when that happens, naturally the body is going to start to become deficient in all of its processes, not just the nutrients, not just the vitamins, but the processes become deficient. So you can't process your nutrients, you can't process your thoughts, there's a lot that slows, and it gets so slow over such a deliberate period of time, because your body is actually struggling in the background to keep it from happening. It's like, why is this going on? I shouldn't be in fight or flight constantly. And as it's trying to self-correct and losing that battle, you don't feel it happening. And before you know it, you're stuck in this chronic fight or flight pattern. And that's where illness lives. All illnesses live there. So why would it be any different with mental illness, right? Why would it be any different with eating disorders, which of course is mental illness? Why would it be any different with drug addiction, mental illness? Why would it be different? It isn't. It's the exact same thing. So I've worked with many, many people who were actively on a lot of psychotropic drugs, and they came to me because they thought they could do maybe better with their nutrition, or at least just understand their bodies a little bit better. I don't think they expected to move away from their medications while they were working with me. But if that's their goal, that's my goal. And I think any good health practitioner really needs to look at the goal of the person sitting in front of them. So the people that I've worked with, we have gotten them 100% off medication, and the way it works is very simple. It starts with, let's get you out of fight or flight. So that means you're staying on your medications. I have no governance over those. I have no interest in managing any medications. Even if I were licensed for it, I wouldn't want to. But overall, we've got to stop the triggers that are happening and then start having conversations. So my general plan, if there is one, is to, of course, assess where my client is, what their goals are, what led them to this thing, use the diagnostic testing to uncover what's going wrong in their physical body that has created this scenario that led them to this medication. Then look at the medication that they're taking and figure out what's being stolen in the body by that thing, and try to replace those stolen elements as soon as possible. But step one is always get you out of fight or flight. So there's a few fun ways to do it. My favorite one is get your legs up the wall. It's an old yoga pose. If anybody who's done a yoga practice has done it before, but some people have never heard about it. And that's the cool, exciting piece. There's no way that your body can be in fight or flight while your legs are up the wall. It's an inverted pose. It doesn't have to be done forever. 5 to 10 minutes usually is enough. You don't have to do anything special. There's no breathing requirements. You could up the ante by doing some good yoga breathing while in that position, but you don't have to. And it starts turning that mechanism off. And as soon as your body starts to recognize what it feels like to be in a state of ease, it craves that, because that's our natural state of being. And it starts to unwind that habitual falling back into fight or flight. So that's usually step one. Get out of fight or flight and use the right tools for you. I almost always start with legs up the wall, but then I very quickly move into EFT. Like, there's got to be some emotional freedom in there, and that usually includes tapping. I'm not sure if you're talking to anybody else who's tapping in this series, but for sure I'm talking about tapping. Tapping is one of the most effective tools that can pull you away from pretty much anything in terms of that emotional spectrum. I used tapping almost exclusively with a client oh goodness, probably 5 years ago, who was coming off of prescription opioids. And it was a very painful process, but we tapped and it completely worked drug free. So we didn't have to do any magical thing. But tapping was, outside of diet, of course, the only real thing that he did. And he did maybe 20 tapping sessions a day. And within 6 months, he was completely off the opioid. So that's a very extreme story, but it just, I hope, illustrates a little bit how powerful tapping can be. So between tapping and legs up the wall and good left nostril breathing at certain times of day and right nostril breathing at other times of day, you can start to change the body's composition and get it to recognize, here's what we need to do, favorite word, recognize, recognize, right? So recognize that your fight or flight pattern, whether or not you knew it was happening, has got to be your first mover in order to get well, because nothing happens after that. You could take B12 all day long, you can get the best methylated vitamins, you can eat the cleanest diet, you can be drinking smoothies, every 5 minutes, and nothing's going to work if you're still in fight or flight. So that's the first thing that has to change. It is peculiar, especially because tapping, and I'll just do a quick little rundown of where the general tapping areas are. Tapping looks a little strange. So, you start with something called your karate chop point and you're tapping here. There's a lot to it. As a matter of fact, maybe we can include a video or something that talks a little bit about tapping. There's a lot of resources. The tappingsolution.com is a great place to go. There's my favorite person of all time, Brad Yates. I've been tapping with him for so many years, I don't even know where to begin. But you start with a little karate chop point, and you're tapping here, and you're making a statement, you're doing a lot of things, but then the tapping points are what make people feel a little crazy. So it's the face, so you do the eyebrow, the side of the eye, and under the nose, the chin point, the collarbone, under the arm, and the top of the head. And everyone that I know that has tried tapping gets to the top of the head, and they're like, is this the point at which I start, chirping like a bird or pretending I'm a monkey? They all feel very awkward about it. But the thing I have said to everyone that I teach how to tap is this: you can't care. You can't care if it looks silly. You can't care if you feel silly. The only thing you can care about is being curious and open-minded enough to try it, because it works all the time. I love skeptical people because they walk into tapping, especially, with this, nothing has worked, and this is definitely not going to work either. Well, tapping's interesting because it does two very unique things. You're going to use words, which is why there's going to have to be some kind of follow-up video that comes along with this, but you use words to explain and express where you are. You're sort of like venting through what's happening to you in your life at that moment. And anything that goes along with it, like, I'm so stressed, this stress is too much for me, it's too much for one person, I can't believe I have to deal with this, whatever it is. Like, so you're using your words to express what's happening to you, but the physical tapping points that you're tapping on, so all of these places are actually acupressure points. And they are sending a neurological signal back to that amygdala that is this wonderful little walnut-sized portion of your brain that, when you're in fight or flight, is sending out a signal that says, I'm in danger, I'm in danger, I'm in danger. Like, everybody be on high alert. So when you're tapping, you're literally tapping into that neurological system and sending the reverse message back to the amygdala, telling it, you're not in danger, you're totally okay. You don't have to send that signal right now. And that's what turns it off. So the words are there to protect your mind and your spirit and really get the full body experience. But even if you never had words, or you were just stuck with what to say, or so overwhelmed and you don't know how to begin, just start tapping. I have frequently talked to people. I have a huge collection of college students, believe it or not. Like, every summer I end up working with this really wonderful group of college students because their parents have referred them, or they found me on their own. And then when they go back to school, we usually are Zooming and doing all kinds of fun things. But I've had many a Zoom session with my college kids, and we're just tapping together. And I tell them on a regular basis, even if you don't know what to say or you don't know what's going on, just start tapping. Just go for the motions, because at the very least, you want that physiological component to kick in. And again, it all brings us back to taking you out of fight or flight. If that is the first mover to change the dynamic regardless of whether or not you're medicated or thinking about becoming medicated, or it doesn't matter. If that's the first mover, then we need to put in place the things that assist that. And tapping is probably the most powerful of those. There is a huge amount of complication in this space, and everybody's feeling, I believe, incredibly overwhelmed, terribly confused, and possibly a little bit angry. Why wouldn't you be angry if something happened in your life and you were depressed or anxious or worried or nervous about it, and everyone around you was saying you're not allowed, right? You're not allowed to have your feelings. Have you noticed that? You're not really allowed. And I think that's what anyone in the holistic space, the functional space, I believe that every single one of us are bringing the same message when it comes to mental health, regardless of how you got there, is that it's overly complex. It should not be this complicated. The body knows how to heal itself if you just get out of its way. So let's figure out where your roadblocks are. But almost more importantly, you're allowed to have your feelings. And we've been blessed with this kaleidoscope of emotions. It's really not as simple as saying you're only allowed to be happy and a little bit sad. You should be able to be ecstatic and devastated and everything in between, and not have a time frame to it. And I believe in terms of the conversational part of this entire spectrum, that's where we go wrong every day of the week. Every day of the week. It's this race to fix something. It's a race to blame something. It's a race to get over something. And in all fairness, there's no health in getting over anything. We go through. You have to go through your problems. You have to go through your emotions. You have to go through to the next side, whatever that is. And we don't celebrate that at all. We demonize it very much. And somewhere in that loop is where the medication becomes the only answer for most people. So I love to meet people who haven't gone down that medicated route yet, because I'm able to not only educate them, but change the dynamic of what their body is doing so they don't need to have that medical conversation, and take the complexity out, because it really has to start with the very, very basics. What are you eating? Are you sleeping? Are you, do you have body functions, and are they working, right? How are you emoting? What is your emotional life like inside your mind and outside? What is your family situation all about? Those types of things have to be first, in every direction, and addressed. And then if at the end of all of that, there's still something to be talked about, then maybe there's another conversation. But I still think that an unmedicated life is more than possible. It's 100% achievable. I've witnessed it. I love families. I think family is amazing. But I also know that things don't actually run in families. It'd be really romantic to say that diseases run in families. Diseases really don't run in families. Genetic predispositions run in families, because a lot of people have the same genetic makeup. That would make sense if you're all in the same family, right? But in terms of disease overall, it has nothing to do with the family you're in, meaning you are not destined to have anything. So if your mother and your grandmother were, chronically depressed and they were medicated for depression, that doesn't mean that that's going to happen to you. And how could I possibly say that, right? What an obnoxious statement. But the truth is, we can turn on or off the genetic markers inside of our bodies. We know this. This is not new science, not by a long shot. Based on how we think, act, feel, eat, behave, all of it. Like, we can absolutely tell our cells how to perform based on what we're doing to them. So for instance, if I wanted to smoke cigarettes all day long, my genes would react a certain way. My entire body would react to that intervention. If I decided instead that I was going to jog a mile every day, my body would react very differently. And so it becomes really dangerous when multiple people in a family either have something go on or they get medicated for something. Everyone in that lineage starts to believe that it's their destiny, and they feed into that whole belief system. So If everyone in the family is eating the same food, everybody in the family is suffering from the same stress, everybody in the family is managing their emotions the same way, well, they probably have similar outcomes. That makes good sense, right? And really what you need to do is step outside of that dynamic. And again, this is where easy, simple things come into play. This is where meditation, mindfulness, self-compassion, there's a topic that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. How about being compassionate to yourself, or learning at least what that looks like and trying it on for size? Anything will change the way your body expresses itself. So you could still live in the same, potentially dysfunctional space. You could still live with people who are highly medicated and never, ever have the same fate as them if you've addressed yourself differently. Mind, body, and spirit. It's a pretty easy prescription to say, look at yourself as an individual, start getting serious about what your body is saying, stop relegating things to the back burner that are important, and listen to your body enough to feed it the right food, provide it the right nutrients, provide it the right mental space. And once you start, really reading your own body signs, within a minute, you'll recognize that you're not like everyone else. And nobody has a destiny when it comes to medication. We're not deficient in medications. No one's born deficient in a benzodiazepine class. It's just not the way it goes. A very interesting thing happened it's probably a decade ago now, when we unlocked the human genome. So when that happened, medical science got super excited, and I think almost everybody out there at some level was interested to say, wow, what can we know? What can we know about, the human genetic composition and what that looks like? And maybe we can make alterations, or we can prevent things. And in all fairness, I think it opened a very scary window to knowing just enough to be dangerous to yourself. And the one place that I have found that is MTHFR. So there are things called genetic SNPs and pieces of our genetic code that all have names and numbers. But MTHFR is really a specific component of the genetic makeup that talks exclusively about our human ability to methylate, which is to change something. We'll talk about that in a second, the change process. But it's the ability to change something from this state to that state. So it's as simple as changing. And nobody needs to know anything else. It's you methylate well or you don't methylate well. It means you change well or you don't change well, certain components, okay? And if we just stick there for a minute, what I find interesting is a lot of people have already gone through the painstaking process of finding out what their genetic makeup is, and they have found out from all sorts of medical doctors, functional medicine doctors, you name it, that they have a heterozygous MTHFR genetic mutation. Doesn't that sound terrifying? It sounds terrifying, right? You have a heterozygous MTHFR mutation. Poor you. But that's not really the case. The case really is almost all humans at this point, it's possibly part of our evolution, who knows why, but the majority of humans do not methylate correctly, which means they have some sort of a MTHFR mutation. So we're all mutated. Great. There's a part of me that wants to say, and has said many times over, who cares? You can't care that much on a scary level and be terrified of your MTHFR mutation. It's just not worth it, because the only thing you have to do differently is if you're getting things, meaning supplements, you have to get them in a methylated form. That's all that really means. It means you have to be a little more vigilant with your diet, because potentially you don't change the chemicals well enough. So you probably have to eat more green leafy vegetables. You probably have to be a little bit more aware of things like folic acid that is poisonous to people like you, because it reinforces that negative change. In which case you're reading your labels, but everybody should be reading labels. So maybe you're not that different after all if you have an MTHFR mutation. What's fascinating though is, because most people don't methylate well, and they potentially don't know that, they run through the standard American diet and they're, constantly missing out on that nutrient train. And those methylated vitamins, this is where all those B vitamins matter. This is where your B12 matters a lot. We're kind of like going back to the beginning, but in a different way. When it all sort of comes around, if you can't absorb the nutrients, so let's say B12, it's like such an easy thing to talk about. If you can't absorb B12, but your body desperately needs B12, because you have that MTHFR component in your personal physiology, it means you will always be deficient, which means your brain will never get what it needs, which means you're always going to have trouble maybe being happy, maybe being awake, maybe being aroused. Maybe you'll always have trouble not going forward in terms of your general daily functions, that you've lost governance over that. Maybe it's as simple as you're highly addicted to just about anything. You could be addicted to gambling, you could be addicted to drugs, you could be addicted to chocolate. It doesn't matter what, you're a highly addicted person because you never gained the nutrients from the things that you're putting in. So I generally say, if you don't know already if you have an MTHFR mutation, just assume you do and get methylated vitamins. Make sure that you talk about methylation. Look at the methylation cycle, and most of it is dietary. As crazy as it sounds, the change, the metabolic structural change in the brain is achieved through diet. I would love to say it's only achieved through vitamin infusions and injections and supplements and all that stuff. That's the fast track to get you someplace, but once you're there, you have to maintain yourself, and the only way to do that really is through diet. I'm a root cause specialist for a reason, and it's because that is the only way to really achieve, in my opinion, the only way to really achieve health and wellness is to address whatever is happening behind the scenes. So, you go under every rock and behind every door and keep asking the question, which is why. So I love what I do because every person that I have seen throughout all of these years is unique and different and interesting and special. And there haven't been two people yet that had the exact same anything. And that's wonderful, right? So I love what I do for that reason. I also love the detective piece. I'm really excited about, really getting into that detective work and continuing to ask why. It's not as simple as, well, I don't have a good digestive system. Why? The body is built this way. This is how the body's supposed to work. Why isn't yours doing that? And then you get one answer, and that leads to another why, and another why, and another why. And finally, you've asked enough whys that you hopefully get to that root cause. That root cause can be, something you were born with. It doesn't have to be something you picked up along the way. It could be something that happened in your childhood. It could be something that happened to you 2 years ago. And there's so much variety in where that root cause really stems from and what it's doing. But ultimately, the body is so smart. I finally have achieved that state. I know we've all heard the statement, like, you don't work a day in your life when you do the thing that you love. And I've said that so many times over. I've finally achieved that state where I love what I do so much, I have to kind of convince myself not to do it 24/7, right? And it's because the body is so fascinating. It's complex and beautiful and interesting. And I didn't realize until I went back to school to get my FDN certification how little we actually know. And what I find most exciting about what I do is that I get to empower people. I mean, obviously, it's super exciting to watch their bodies change, to watch their lifestyles change. I've gotten some of the most incredible compliments from my clients that I'm humbled by the things that they say. And I believe them because I've had that experience in my own life with really good practitioners taking you to a place and really celebrating who you are, but saving your life and giving you the tools to be able to live it the way you want to, not stuck in the background watching other people do the things you want to do. So the reason I love what I do as much as I do is that everybody is different. And I get to, on a regular basis, really celebrate how special being human is and how uniquely built we are. And there's nothing better than that for me. So interestingly enough, there's a lot of different tests that can be run, that I run all the time, especially in this space. So we're talking specifically about, like mental health and, what's available there, except for, just a handful of pills, which we all know don't work. I really want to say that medications work until they don't work, which means they change your physiology just enough to make you feel different. They take something from you, which we've talked about a little already. But by and large, if you're on one medication, you're going to be moved to two. If you're on two, you're going to be moved to three. And the reason for that is that they don't do what we wish they could do, which is completely correct your physiology, your brain chemistry, and the way that you're emoting or living, right? And so, wouldn't it be easier if we could just change the base physiology, change what's going on in your actual body? And the way to understand what needs to be changed is through diagnostic testing. So that's one of the things that I do and I love about my practice. So my heavy hitters there are stool testing. You really need to understand the ecology of the GI tract. What's going on in there? Is it being stymied by, pathogenic bacteria or parasites or a yeast or mold overgrowth? There's so many different things that can be sort of hijacking your own ability to methylate your vitamins, assume your nutrients, and other things. So you got to get to the gut and at least figure out what's possible there. A lot of times, that's what you're going to find in terms of the most deficits. You'll find them in the gut anyway. Most of our brain chemistry, almost all of it, is made in the GI tract. So if your brain is suffering and your mind isn't working, you really should go to the source. Where else should you go? If there's something wrong with your sink, you're not going to go look, somewhere in the basement. You're going to start at the sink, right? You're going to look at the sink first and figure out what's going on with that sink. You won't just go in another room. So I always look at the gut first. I like to do tests in parallel when I can, and really that's mostly dependent on the clients that I'm working with. The other one is a hair tissue mineral analysis test, which talks or looks exactly at which nutrients you have. And sometimes you have too many of one versus the other. Sometimes things like copper toxicity can wreak havoc on a person's emotional and mental body. And the way to fix that is to detox the copper out. I mean, how simple that would be versus adding a pharmaceutical agent on top. Now you're copper toxic and suffering with pharmaceutical agents. So, I really think that what is most distressing about the mental health space at this moment is the level of complexity that goes into it, and the fact that no one stops to think about the simple, easy things first. And the simple, easy things really are physiological. What kind of vitamin, capacity does this person have? Are they absorbing their nutrients? So what does their gut look like? The sad part is that conventional medicine doesn't really have a lot of these tools. You really do need to reach out into functional medicine for almost all of them. So obviously, like I said, I'm going to do the hair tissue mineral analysis test to look at nutrients. I'll definitely take a look at the gut with good effective stool testing. But then you can do neurotransmitter testing. There's a lot of ways to do it. Blood is the worst one and urine is the best. So the test that I use and the company I've been using does dried urine samples, which generally means you would urinate on a test strip and then it dries for about 24 hours and then you send in the sample that way. It's funny because I've been asked 1,000 times, what's dried urine? I'm like, well, it doesn't start dry. But outside of that, you do good urine sampling and then you can assess like what are the neurotransmitters that are available, how is the body using those neurotransmitters, what is high, what is low. And I have to say, so many times you take a look at any of those tests, in particular the neurotransmitter testing, and you can see with such clarity toxic food, toxic medications, toxic street drugs. You can see where the toxicity is. And when you can see it there, it's not just a pretty picture, it's a roadmap for how to remove those things so that you can heal. And really that's, I think, the goal for any good practitioner is to get underneath the root of what's causing all of this misery so that you can bring that person back to a full, healthy life, not just numb them out with medication so that they can live half of a life